Thank you. I'm glad to be back at the Old Jail Arts Center. I feel privileged to be here. I feel privileged to be kind of the opening act for Ed Blackburn. I can't believe I can actually say that. That's amazing. And I want to start with a couple of quick thank yous. I want to thank Kate Charles Ferguson for housing me, feeding me, shuttling me back and forth, and giving me pencil sharpeners the week I was here. I want to thank Rebecca Bridges and Pat Kelly for making it possible for me to get my work done that week. It was like being back as when I lived here, and it was also like being back as a guest both. It was really a special week. I think they had a weird week in Fort Worth. I enjoyed my week here very much. I planned to be here that whole week. I wasn't iced in. Well, I would have been if it hadn't been for that transportation. But so I do hope that if you haven't had a chance to get upstairs yet, that you will. And I'll tell you a little bit about where my work comes from and a little bit about the process, both. When you see it, you'll understand that I'm very interested in line, and line quality and complexity of line, and that is probably my biggest idea generator, even though there are a number of sort of topics and subjects and things that I'm interested in. Visually and conceptually, it really does, at this point, get down to line and to drawing. Even the things that I do that are done in ink with a brush, I still consider them drawing rather than painting. I'm not sure that that's correct, but that's the way I think of the work. And I did have the opportunity to make a number of new pieces, a new body of work for this show, including a piece that was executed directly on the wall here in charcoal pencil, which was not what I originally thought I would use that week. And we'll get to that in a minute. But that piece will be up. It exists only as long as the show exists, so it comes down on May 22nd, and I hope Kat doesn't make me paint it out. It's the third piece that I've had a chance to do on site as part of a show. They take about a week. This one I logged in at a little over 52 hours of work. I don't mind that they only exist for a short amount of time. They're well documented, and I just enjoy the opportunity to do something really big that's kind of wraps around part of the room, something I don't get to do otherwise. Some of my inspirations are things like hairnets for their crazy complexity of line. I like very obsessive, compulsive kinds of line. I find that the process of making the work is very meditative. It's not anxiety-producing. I'm pretty tightly wound to begin with, and so it becomes a very focused process. It's one of the times that I get to be calm is when I'm making work, which is really nice. And I think most artists in this room understand exactly what I'm talking about. I like things like doilies. I did a whole lot of work with doilies at one point. I moved on to lace and some of the, in particular, lace from my Catholic upbringing, head coverings, those kinds of things that women wear in Mass. But the things that I like the most in terms of lace and doilies are the mass-produced. Not the handmade decorative, but the mass-produced things that point back to that handmade origin. That's important to me. I think that the handmade is beautiful enough to begin with. I'm interested in the stuff that we tend to use to decorate with that's mass-produced. It may not really be that beautiful, but we think of it in terms of adding beauty and adding decoration. So there's an interest there for me. And this show I entitled Alchemy. I'm using a lot of gold in it. Gold point, which is real gold. Silver point, which is real silver. And then gold acrylic ink, which has no gold in it at all, but it's a nice iridescent gold. I'm trained as a metalsmith, as Tom said in my introduction. That's one of my degrees is making jewelry. So I am very interested in the decorative arts. I have that in my background. And although I'm not currently making jewelry and I'm not making furniture and other decorative arts, I'm interested in the history there, and I'm interested in the importance that we give precious metals. So the idea of taking something like a mass-produced doily, or in the case of two drawings in the show, it's not actually dryer lint, it's dryer sheet. I call them my dust bunnies. They're on the floor. Pat built the pedestals at my request, and so they kind of float right on the floor. So that's actually little pieces of dryer sheet. Most of my work is done by picking imagery or collecting imagery or collecting an object and putting it on, your old-fashioned overhead projector, and then working very large. So these things are transformed from, something like this big or this big to pretty big in size. So as I work on something, whether it's on a piece of paper or directly on the wall, there's an abstraction that happens in the process of making the work. So I know that in the end I get an identifiable object or image, but in the process of making it, I'm working at it really close, and it just breaks down into a rhythm of line in the repetition. I know how a hairnet is woven on a machine because my arm memorizes that pattern in the course of making the work. And the same with some of these paper doilies, and the same with some of the lace. You kind of internalize that. And again, that's part of the meditative process of making the work that I really enjoy. So there's a lot of gold ink and silver point and gold point in some of the work upstairs, because I like that it ties me back to that metalsmithing history, my history as well as the decorative arts history. And gold is interesting too. Think of golden anniversary, I just turned 50. The idea of the elixir of life, and alchemy, of course, it's both a spiritual pursuit, but it's also an old idea that you could find an elixir that would transform a base metal into gold, that somehow you could short-step that process, and it's like having to mine gold. You can actually mine copper, and through this elixir turn it into gold. So this idea of something that is transformative. And so in some ways, since I'm working with things that are very sort of man-made objects, found objects, throwaway objects, gross objects like hairnets, and the idea of elevating them to art, making them larger, making them iconic, in some ways there's a small transformative process that happens there. So I like the idea of alchemy as applied to that. By the way, the hairnets and things I buy at the drugstore fresh, okay? I don't collect old hairnets, don't give me old hairnets. I will take old lace and doilies, but I don't take old hairnets. There's also a number of drawings up there that I call them branching, and they're the newest work. The work that's done directly on the wall is untitled, but it's a branching drawing. I took a series of photographs, several years ago of vines in the winter without their leaves, because I love the patterning. And for those of you that know, it's the Maui Art Building at TCU, it's their vines in the winter. And I sat on them for a couple of years, and then finally printed them and had transparencies made and started projecting them and working with them. And it's interesting because I'm able to work abstractly. I can take an actual photograph and start to isolate the elements that I want to draw attention to, the particular body of grouping of lines in this one. I want to emphasize this corner, or I want to emphasize this motion in this image, in this particular drawing. So I can actually work from the same image multiple times and get very different drawings from it. And that's actually something I'm still doing. That's a body of work I started for this show that I'm finding really fruitful and I'm still pursuing. So, and they're smaller pieces, which is kind of a relief because they're more portable, they're easier to frame, they're easier to show. They're not 4 feet by 6 feet, they're 24 by 36 inches or something, so that's nice too. And again, I like the gold. I like the fact that it stands up on the paper, it has a dimension, it has iridescence, it looks precious even though it's not. And that may be about all I have to tell you. Other than with all the pencil sharpeners that were lent to me, I found that the one that really worked was my eyebrow pencil sharpener in my makeup bag. Because and I still owe Rebecca and Catherine the pencil sharpener. I broke theirs before I found what worked. I had brought a number of materials with me. I knew that I wanted to do a wall drawing. I knew that it was maybe a hairnet, maybe a dryer sheet, maybe a branching drawing. And when Pat and I laid out the show, we realized that it needed to be something done in a pencil or charcoal. It needed to be darker. Because one room up there is very quiet. It's very still. When you see it, you know what I'm talking about. It almost whispers. The quality of the line is tiny. The pieces are small. It's the one with the dust bunnies on the floor. The other room has just 3 pieces in it. The wall drawing, a large gold drawing called Diadem, and then a large hairnet drawing. So it has the bolder imagery, but we knew it needed to be a darker piece. So. And if you've seen the video that Rebecca shot of me that week, there are moments where I am literally upside down working on the drawing at the bottom, to get it to go to the floor. But yeah, it was a very good week. I really enjoyed it, and It was really nice to be here again for that. It was very nice. So I'll take questions. It's kind of hard to talk about work that's you're not haven't had a chance to see yet, maybe. But if you've got questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, I'm curious. Most of your pieces upstairs are on solid paper, but there's one on graph paper. Was there a particular rationale for doing it on graph paper?
No, I bought a bunch of vellum, and I thought I would be smart and go get a roll of vellum, and it turned out it was graph vellum. I didn't really want it, but I went ahead and did one piece on it, and then I went back and bought more sheets of ungraphed vellum. So that's the only reason for that.
Did the drawing, the direct drawing on the wall, because it's site specific, were you thinking about the kind of movement that would be taking place in a room like that, or the kind of shadow that might be cast, in that particular cell, or?
Well, I was already interested in doing a series of drawings about branches, but I also knew that they would work well with those rooms because of the punctuation of the windows, the idea of being in a cell, looking out at the treetops. I think it will be interesting to see if the installation changes any in the spring when you can see more leaves out there, or you do right now. But in terms of the light patterns moving across the wall, no. We blocked out the windows while I was working so that I wouldn't have those moving across the image area. But I did center, in terms of how I composed the big branching drawing on the wall, I wanted it to look like the window was kind of at the center of it and it was coming out from it, growing out from the sides of it.
I will say that when you take pictures when I was doing installation shots, the parallelograms, I guess, that the windows cause the pieces became an element. So you have to, especially when the drawing on the wall, when the light's on that through the windows, it becomes an element of that piece. You can't kind of get around it.
I know, and it really kind of bothers me. And I knew it would happen. I didn't factor it into the piece. I didn't know how to factor it into the piece, but I find it distracting. I like it when you can just read it without having to see the sun going across it. Margaret?
And I'm wondering if the original uses of those spaces resonated with you in any way as you planned this show or thought about it, in what ways?
Probably not as much during the planning of it, although I had come out in November to look at the spaces and see where the windows were and to think about how my work would fit and what did I want to do for the space. But I really felt it when I was locked in here working at night and it was 70 degrees out there. And the cold comes through those stone walls. I was freezing. I kept having to put on more layers and put down blankets and stuff. So probably not as much in the subject matter that I chose was not directly tied to the cells. But in terms of the imagery and the way that those cells look and what you see outside those windows, yes, there was a relationship there.
Did the change from something that seemed to be like the branches directly connected, like if you were in there, your visual experience, out the windows, and it seemed like a number of the other pieces kind of became a related imagery, but more about the way a piece would work, kind of just as a drawing, as a piece of art. In other words, it seemed like it went sort of through a progression of leaving the real direct connection. And were you thinking, and here's my actual question, were you thinking that is a sort of alchemy to go through that process?
No, I really wasn't, but I like that. It was really more of an opportunity to show what I've been working on most recently, kind of, from a couple of different bodies of work as well as one that was made for here, and hoping really that installation drawing, which is very current, would tie into the other two pieces in that room, and then of course bring you from one cell to the other in terms of a visual connection between images. But no, not in the sense that you're describing.
Have you thought of going back to your metal smithing and taking these images and creating them in metal on a hard wearable thing?
Yes and no. I'm interested in working with metal, but in terms of drawing with it. I want to find other ways of drawing with it. I'm probably not interested in going back to jewelry. But I'm interested in finding some ways of drawing in it, whether it's chasing or repoussé, but I want it to really function in the world of drawing or sculpture and not in the world of jewelry. Is it time to eat?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.